Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and joining us for this session of the program is Chris Hendricks. Chris, welcome back. Thanks
Jim,
for coming in again.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here. Appreciate it.
It's funny, you came in about 4 months ago, the last time in the rotation when you came in, and like you were just saying off camera, the topics really haven't changed in 4 months. Things have changed, but the topics just haven't changed.
A few nuts and bolts, same big issues.
But it's still, and that just, it's 2020.
Yep.
When this year's just been hard to figure probably from your standpoint where you're sitting up there and just down here too.
Especially as a first-year legislator, it's been a little tricky to navigate, but also a good learning experience too. I feel like I can be a better advocate for my constituents now. Well,
I've been starting, we started the last time too. Why don't you give us an update of just what is transpiring on Beacon Hill, sort of the broad picture right now for you guys?
Well, as many of your viewers know, we just passed the House budget, and we're still working on the overall budget with the Senate and the governor's side of things. Last week, we passed, as far as education goes, level funding for education, which I'm pleased about. A lot of ins and outs of the budget, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But generally speaking, the numbers are going up, as I'm sure you know. The media's been reporting on that pretty well, and there's been a lot of unease about these numbers going up. You hear some talk about some of the field hospitals out in Western Mass, and even some down here over at UMass, thinking about reopening again. So there's going to be a lot of tough decisions, I think, over the next couple of weeks on how to navigate these increasing numbers. Hopefully, it turns out like last time that we prepare for the surge, and then we don't really need all those resources. Hopefully, that's how it pans out this time. But I'm pretty confident that whatever comes down the pike, that we'll be prepared for it.
And staffing and what have you. I mean, your staff is still
all working remotely. Yes, it's not required. It's encouraged that we work remotely from the State House. I mean, I could go in if I wanted to, but for the most part, everybody is working remotely. Even staff. I know obviously leadership. They have people up there almost every day, House leadership and Senate leadership and all that. But for the most part, it's a ghost town up there.
I asked Rep. Cabral this when he was in, so I'll ask you too. Has it been more difficult, because this is your second year in your first term, has it been more difficult for you because you don't have that personal contact with your colleagues or even with commissioners and their staffs and what have you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I was talking about that the other week with my aide, that one of the important things I think for a first-year legislator is building relationships, because that's how you get things done. And they don't. There's no booklet for that. But the only way, the best way to do that is by being up there, especially during budget week, because as you know, you're pretty much forced to be there all week, all day with your colleagues. So that's a great way to kind of get to know people, build relationships, which obviously is a bit hard now. It's definitely. To the detriment of that.
So in a sense, do communities miss out in a lot of ways? Not in a lot of ways, but in some ways.
I mean, you could make the case that, if this were to continue for a long period of time, yes. I mean, I think, since the vaccine hopefully is right around the corner and it looks like we'll soon be getting a handle on the COVID. But if this were to last, oh yes, it would certainly affect people's, standing, their representation.
The one thing I think is funny is when you look at your job and the senators and whatever, is that you talk about the relationship, but like issues that are important to New Bedford, sure, New Bedford's got some parochial issues, but there are issues in Springfield that are just as important to them as they are to New Bedford.
Right.
And if you don't have that, not that you don't have the relationship, but a lot of deals get done.
Yes.
Just by you walking down the hall.
Right. Or at a caucus meeting.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
At lunch, Yeah, no, that's a serious concern. And like you mentioned, especially for a guy like me who's first year. Thankfully I've been working quite a bit
Right.
before COVID to do those types of things, especially with our delegation here, like you mentioned, Tony and Paul and all those guys who have been unbelievably helpful. So at the end of the day, I'm still very fortunate that I've had some good progress up on that front. But yeah, no, it's certainly gonna could affect things down the road if it were to last a little longer.
Right. Overall, do you think the state's done pretty well handling the pandemic?
I do.
Up to this point?
I do. We were kind of in a fortunate position, I think, because when the first surge came, we knew it was coming. New York got the worst of it first, so we were kind of able to prepare based on their numbers, based on their experience, based on what they were telling us. And so that was helpful. So by the time our surge hit us, we didn't need the field hospital in Dartmouth. We didn't need a lot of the other resources that we put in line, which is good. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping it kind of works that way on this other resurgence. So I think we're in a pretty good position that we have enough data, we have enough research, enough evidence to know what we need to do. For this new surge.
I mean, you must get just all people talking to you all the time about shutdown, not shutdown, building our businesses open, businesses closed. I mean, is there really a right answer in this?
Yeah, no, it's frustrating because no one's been in this position before, and to shut down businesses and to shut everything down. That's a big step, and I think the governor is certainly. I think the governor has been doing a great job, and he's certainly aware of the fact that if we do have rising numbers, we're going to have to scale it back a little bit. I think we had a lot of those, a lot of the distancing measures in place now already, so I think it's going to be easy to kind of beef those up a little bit if need be. By restricting hours, things like that, which the governor has already done as far as restaurants and stuff. So yeah, the next few weeks will be challenging for sure, but I think just like last time, I think we'll get through it. I really do.
And I think fatigue is a huge issue right now as well.
Yeah, and then the fatigue issue, it makes people a little lazy. You know what I mean? And with wearing their masks and stuff. Well, obviously we're enough distance apart, but we've been wearing our masks all day, but as time goes on, you kind of get lazy, and I'll go visit my friend, whatever, and then that can kind of snowball. Especially in a time when we have rising cases like we do now.
So we talk about that. Let's talk about the budget, the House budget, just the overall plan. Were you pleased with the final product? And I know obviously we just got to go into conference committee, but from the House side of things, were you pleased? With a tough budget, I guess.
It was tough. I'm saying I'm happy with it. I obviously, we could have used more money by way of earmarks. Not just me, but a whole majority of the representatives up there kind of got bumped down as far as earmarks, which I totally understand. Mm-hmm. But from a statewide public policy perspective, I think we did a great job with the House side of the budget. There's a lot of things in there. I think they're going to help us through this next push of cases. I mentioned the education piece, which is one of my top priorities budget-wise. I wanted to make sure that we had enough money for that, and we did the level funding, as compared to last year. So I was very pleased with that. We actually put an additional $108 million for schools to account for inflation, and another $50 million on top of that to account for remote learning, PPE in the schools, the low-income children's education, things along those lines. So there's a lot. We obviously prioritize a lot of COVID-related stuff, a lot of education stuff, and I think that's the only thing we could really do, especially considering the fact, Jim, that we didn't know with the federal money that's going to come.
Right. We still don't know.
And a lot of this budget, a lot of these budget items kind of are dependent a little bit on the fact that we might get some money down the road. So I'm still hopeful that whether it be in the next month or two or after January 20th, I think something's going to come eventually. Just a matter of how much.
So I think you came back. You've been here 3 times this year, I know. So the first time we talked was the budget process originally was starting before COVID hit. So I would imagine from that budget to what just passed in the House, 180 degrees different from what I guess the dream was back then. And I would assume that the priorities totally changed.
Totally, yeah. I mean, you have to make sure kids are in school and they're learning and they have all the proper resources. I mean, I think that's, as a public policy perspective, one of the biggest priorities we should have. And obviously money for PPE and making sure that schools have the proper resources. But one thing that you got to think about is businesses. In cities and towns and their budgets. The feds I think need to come through on that because the budgets across the state with the small cities and these small towns are really taking a major hit. And it's only going to get worse if they don't have a major package coming down the pike sometime soon.
And the thing that you had to, not you, but the body had to deal with too, is there's no money out there. It's not like you can just increase taxes and say, we're going to cover it, because there are people that just aren't working right now.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'm glad with. There was no new taxes in this budget, which I think is good. Obviously, the increase in fees for Lyft and ride sharing is there, but as far as new taxes, there was nothing new, which is obviously what we wanted. But we did use $1.5 billion of the rainy day fund,
right,
which I think we're in a very fortunate position to have. I think the overall was like $4 billion, I think, was in there, or maybe $3.5 billion was there.
I think Tony was saying it was like 3.6 or something like that.
Yeah. So I'm really happy that we're using that, because if you recall, before COVID hit, when we were having the transportation debate, every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there was saying, let's go to the rainy day fund, let's give everyone a break. And that rainy day fund's there for a reason, for a rainy day,
And it's born.
Good. Yeah, that's a good
Well, I
way
remember
of
one
putting
thing you were saying that we talked about way back when was, probably this year, but before, was the gas tax, which, as you were saying, I mean, your constituents have to drive to Boston. They're the ones that are paying. The people in Boston aren't paying for a gas tax.
Yeah, the gas tax is
just one example,
right? But that was an $18 billion legislative package. But raising the taxes 5 cents per gallon at the pump, it does affect it. And there are some people up there who wanted to raise it 12 cents, 15 cents. So I think how we landed on that issue was a reasonable, palatable increase, but cities and towns are going to be struggling, because of lack of revenue.
Do you see departments in the state? Obviously, they've had to cut, but do you see layoffs? A lot of layoffs in the budget?
It's a little hard to tell at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a struggle coming down the road. I know with UMass. There was talk about big layoffs there, and the unions there. And this budget funds the UMass system. Funds their operating budget, gives them everything they're going to need. And their union agreed to take a pay cut. So there's going to be a lot of that, I think, over the next couple of years. A lot of hard decisions. There might be layoffs. It's hard to say at this point.
But the interesting thing too is, as you do this budget, probably I would assume next year's budget is going to be even more difficult. That's what this year's budget.
That's what they're saying, actually. That next year's budget is going to be more challenging. This is only my second budget, and so I only really have 1 year's worth of, how budgets work in general. But next year especially with lack of revenue, lack of people working, it's also going to be tough.
You were talking before about the overall budget, but there wasn't a lot of things for individual districts and what have you. Was there anything in the district that you were pleased that you were able to hold on to?
No, but there was a lot of stuff the delegation was able to get.
Okay.
Like Tony and the guys, guys who've been there a lot longer than me, were able to get some stuff for downtown, for the city, and for earmarks, like I think the Zeitarian got some money, like they usually do. But there was certainly stuff in my district that is going to have to go without. I'll tell you straight up. That was hard, to look at the consolidated amendments and see very little of your stuff in there can get you going. But once you realize that
you're not the only one,
I'm not the only one.
Yeah, exactly.
That there's 160 other people who don't have the luxury of earmarks, and that's kind of something that we were aware of and we were pretty much prepared to deal with,
Right.
in our own heads. But certainly, this after school program in my district we're going to have to figure out how we're going to get money for. The opioid task force here in New Bedford, which I got state money for on last budget.
I remember you talking about
First
that,
time
yeah.
they ever got state money, and they didn't get money this year. So there's going to be. We're going to have to stick together, I think, over the next couple of years. The advocacy people usually rely on state money for nonprofits, things of that nature. They're the ones that are going to, and it's funny because when something like COVID hits, those are the people we rely on, to make sure people have food, make sure
Right.
people have, housing, and then because of COVID, they're obviously going to take the biggest hit. So it's, I feel for the advocates and a lot of the nonprofits in the area.
We're talking with Chris Hendricks, who represents New Bedford and Acushnet in the state legislature. You're watching the Beacon Hill Report. Talk a little bit about, there were a lot of amendments, and I know reading, and I was talking to you off air, that when the budget was first proposed, there wasn't a lot of amendments, and then all of a sudden a lot of policy amendments started coming about. You mentioned the abortion rights amendment that was put in.
Right.
Explain that a little bit to folks.
So if there was the Roe bill, which was a very comprehensive abortion access legislation, which was in my committee. I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee,
Right.
and we had, I think it was over a course of 2 or 3 days, testimony, up there. Very contentious as you'd expect. And so that, I think, was a little over the line as far as legislatively and public policy wise. So this amendment to the budget, which I think originally the budget was going to have no substantive, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, and leadership was pretty clear on, all right, listen, I filed some substantive stuff, not knowing that likely wouldn't go through, but you file it anyway. But obviously a lot of people filed substantive amendments, with the Roe amendment included. And so I think with the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Robert DeLeo, House leadership, they really wanted to, protect, women's legal access to abortion, and it's obviously already legal now. But with so much uncertainty with the Supreme Court, we don't know how they're going to rule over the next 4 or 5 years, or even sooner. So I think getting that done was kind of a late priority that the House leadership I don't think really foresaw. Obviously, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg passing. So what that amendment does, it's not the Roe Act. It's very different. It basically it codifies a woman's right to access to an abortion and reproductive health, and it also lowers the age from 18 to 16, which goes in line with the age of consent. So the reasoning is if someone's allowed to have sexual intercourse, they should also be allowed to make their own reproductive health decisions. Mm-hmm. So that amendment got in, and now it's up to the Senate to see what they want to do, and obviously the governor. Obviously, we'll have to see how that works out. But yeah, it's so as far as substantive amendments, that one was able to get through. There's a lot of housing amendments too that wasn't able to make it in.
Right,
which
has been which is a huge issue because you've got the people who right now haven't been working and they can't pay their mortgages, and I know there's a sort of a moratorium right now on that, but that's going to end.
Right, the federal moratorium till the end of the year.
Right.
Correct. And that's the federal moratorium is not it's not as protective as the state one was, which expired in October. I couldn't agree with you more on these. This is going to be a huge issue. I think we probably, I was, if I had to be really disappointed about anything about the budget, is that we really didn't talk about housing as much as there was an amendment to extend the moratorium, which I voted on in the affirmative, but didn't pass. Mike Conley's a big advocate for housing up there, and I'm on the housing committee, so I'm up to date with a lot of these issues. But a lot of the amendments that were in with the budget relative to housing, were protections for landlords too. There's a lot of talk about.
And that I didn't interrupt, but that's one of the things that I think people don't understand too. Is there's two sort of issues with that. You've got the renters. You got, especially in New Bedford, you got triple deckers and 3 different families limited.
Yeah.
But you also have the owner of that building who's trying to pay a mortgage as well.
Right. Yeah.
And he's under the gun.
Yep. And the amendment that I filed with the budget, and again, I had no big expectations about the amendment, but what the amendment that I filed protected people who have landlords who are homeowners in forbearance. with the banks. So I think whatever protections we do put in place or keep in place down the road for tenants, we also have to do for landlords, because that's, a lot of, landlords, that's a lot of landlords, that's their business, and that's how they make a money, is the income they get from those properties, as you know. So I think whatever is done has to be, and obviously those two sides are competing. The tenants, the landlords, don't want too much protections for the tenants, because that's, indirectly affects them, which is a decent point. So I think we have to have a measured approach with the housing issue, but it has to be substantial, I think, at some point.
Yeah.
Especially when the moratorium ends.
I was going to say, do you expect when the new session starts in January, do you expect that to be taken up pretty quick?
I think so. I'm obviously going just off what I can tell in my own experiences, but I've had some, I'm on the housing committee as well as judiciary, and I've been in contact with Chairman Honan, who's the chair of that committee, and he's been pretty aggressive about trying to get something through. In that Representative Mike Conley, who I also mentioned, he's been making the case pretty effectively, as far as I'm concerned, about we needed to get something done, because the numbers don't lie.
Right.
In how the House understands that, I think. So I'm hoping, I'm hopeful that we can get something in this budget that we voted on last week. Put about 30 million some odd increase in RAFT to help tenants manage, eviction and manage housing resources. So I think that's going to help, hopefully, for the short term.
And this isn't an issue just in big cities either. I mean, small towns have this issue too.
Everywhere,
Yeah.
right. And even in small towns, a lot of people rent.
Right.
And even if they don't, they usually, still own a home. So they're, whether you own a home or rent a home, you're going to be affected by this. And I think it is coming to a point where I think we're going to be forced to do something. And I hope we do. I wish we did last week, but I'm encouraged that we can do something on the housing front in the next session early.
One of the issues that's got a lot of, and we were talking about this off camera, that's been getting a lot of talk, hasn't passed anything yet, but sports betting.
Yeah.
I know that, listening to the radio and, looking at the sports section in the papers, supporters are saying, well, we're losing money to New Hampshire and Rhode Island and what have you, but Massachusetts still at this point hasn't approved it. Right.
And I think there was an amendment to the budget that obviously didn't get through last week regarding the sports betting. But yeah, they back to the point of no substantive stuff in the budget. I think once people knew that there was a buzz about the Roe Amendment getting through or discussed and going to be debated, there was also talk about the sports betting, which didn't get through. I also think that the sports betting issue is something that's on leadership's radar, something that I can just kind of sense. So I'm also hopeful that we can have that debate very early.
Do you think,
because that's a revenue thing as well?
Right. Do you think that there's a lot of opposition to it, or?
There probably will be.
Really? Yep.
And to be honest with you, I that's kind of an issue that I haven't really cracked open the books and taken a deep dive into. I'm certainly for the freedom to bet on stuff, but in more revenue. But at the same time, I think we got to be careful on that front.
But the hard thing is you've already, not you, but we already have now casinos.
Right. Yeah. So it's going to be a tough argument to make that we shouldn't have that as well. You can do it.
The act is one thing,
the access is a little different,
and
that might be the biggest argument, I guess, against it, or to support an argument against it. But yeah, we'll have to see. I think I was hoping that we'd get some substantive stuff between now and the end of the year. I don't know if there's any appetite to get any more substantive stuff by the end of the year. Probably at the new year in 2021, we'll probably be looking at that stuff. But surely, I think it's pressing that we should look into it. If not only other reason, then the revenue reason.
When we were here last time, we talked about police reform, and we were talking about you guys were actually actively debating that, and obviously things have passed in some ways, but obviously there's no consensus to finish or to get the consensus between the House and the Senate back to the governor. Where do we stand on that, and what, from your point, because I know Judiciary is involved too, what are the biggest holdup do you find?
Well, right now it's in conference committee, as you know, so it's a little hard to tell about what the negotiations between Senate leadership, House leadership, and the governor's office, and what's happening there. I'm certainly proud of the work we did in the House relative to that bill. I certainly think the Senate side, when the whole qualified immunity stuff, I think, is a little bit misreported on. It's a very complicated legal issue. And if you recall, right after the George Floyd tragedy happened, there was a lot of general consensus that something should be crafted on a legislative front. In the Black and Latino caucus, who led the way on that, as they'd be the authority to dictate these issues, they didn't mention qualified immunity at all. And it wasn't until the Senate just decided to put a piece in there regarding qualified immunity. The House version of the bill dialed a lot of that back.
Well, I was going to say, the House, the critics, as I've read, said the House didn't go far enough, and then there are some that said the Senate went too far.
Yeah.
And I don't know, obviously I'm not up there, so I don't know this, how important, not how important, but the details of the issue, but it seems to me that where do you find the middle ground at that point?
Yeah. I think the House version, I'm a little biased, but I think the House version is more in line with where we should go. What the House version essentially does in a nutshell is if it creates a decertification process for misconduct by any police officer. If that police officer goes through that process and gets found culpable or liable or responsible for that conduct, depending on what it is, then they could potentially lose that qualified immunity as a defense. So it's very narrow, and it's very, you can pinpoint when exactly that qualified immunity will be stripped from that person. So I think that's a more pragmatic way to go as far as a public policy, because this is going to be a tricky situation moving forward. But I think putting a purely citizen committee to oversee police misconduct, I think, is a very innovative and it's going to be a game changer, I think. It's going to provide a lot more transparency, a lot more justice.
But not you, but they're facing a deadline in a sense, because the session theoretically ends in January, or in December really, but so if nothing, if the conference committee can't agree to anything, it goes away, really, right?
I believe so. Yeah, you might know more about the procedural stuff than I do, but yeah, I've been told that if those negotiations fall apart, it could mean that this bill doesn't get through at all, and also whether or not the governor is going to veto it, right? Because I don't even know if we had a veto, because it didn't get through by a huge majority. So I'm pretty sure we have a veto proof count, but I'm not even sure about that. So there's a lot of question marks on that. I would like to see it. I mean, a lot of people worked hard on that legislation. People that still are. Right. So I would like to see something close to the House version get through at the end of the day.
Got about a minute left, but I just want to first, congratulations on your re-election.
Thank you.
Be there for another 2 years.
Thank you.
As we come up,
bizarre campaign, but
we're entering the holiday season now. Just your thoughts on a tough year, really.
Yeah. It's amazing that we're creeping up on the end of this year. It really is something. Whoever's listening, I just want to say, be safe. We all have instincts to go to big family events on Thanksgiving and Christmas, but I think we just need to dial it back, hunker down for the next handful of months till the vaccine apparatus is being dispersed. So I just hope everyone remains safe and healthy and takes social distancing into account.
Sounds good. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Jim.
We'll see you early next year, I'm sure.
See you soon.
All righty. That's going to do it for this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.